Fractures, and he's going to be talking a little bit about his project Scenes, which he's been dropping on Base, as well as I believe some other chains. Thanks for joining us this morning, Jamie.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Could you tell us, I've already talked with you about Scenes in the past, but for people who aren't aware, what is the Scenes project?
Okay, so I'll do the little the pitch talk. So it basically came from conversations about the value of music, right? That everyone values music in a really personal way, but out in the world, we're really struggling to work out like how to capture that value. Especially independent artists are struggling how to capture that value. So the idea was basically that out of conversations is that we all love music, right? We get married to music, we cry to music, it reminds us of our friends, it reminds us of our families, and it attaches itself to our lives in this really unique way, right? Its problem is its benefit, right? That it's not a visual medium, but because it's not a visual medium, it attaches itself, it soundtracks our life, and it becomes bonded with like our emotional experiences. So Scenes was basically like a way to kind of rethink an album. And what happens is that a song would be released and you would go to a website and the song would play. So you'd be listening to the song and a question would come on the screen that would be designed to kind of elicit a memory in your life. So the idea was like, what happens if me as an artist, if I try and create that emotional bond, right? I can't pop up at your wedding and like play my song or when you have your first kiss. But what if I like experiment with like, you're listening to my music and I offer you a chance to think back on your life, on like maybe whatever the question makes you think of. And the next step would be that you would respond to that question with some text and a photo. And in doing so, I would then create like a custom piece of artwork out of every memory that everybody submitted. And what would happen is each song would have a gallery of memories, and all these memories would form like visual art pieces that were dropped on Base, but also, as you can see there, like each song submission round would be a piece of artwork, the official artwork on Spotify. So it was like it ended up getting on this really good wave because all of a sudden the whole industry shifted about like co-creating with fans and engaging with your fan base and emotional connections. People were getting less excited about viral stuff and more excited about like deeper connection. And that's what the whole project was about, is like emotional bonds and connections. And it went really well. Yeah, it was a big success. It was a big success in terms of emotional connection, right? Like getting people to do something other than just watch a video and click like is very, very hard. But the people that took it, people messaged me saying they were crying when they did it, and they hadn't thought about that for ages. People sent them, did their scene, and I emailed them on the day of release. The idea would be that like you re-prompt people to listen to your music by giving them something back of value. And they would listen, they would message me being like, oh, I sent it to my partner. I'd never said that to her in person. And I like sent her the thing. And actually now I'm continuing that into real life. Because the idea is that people started telling me that they were sending it to people. I thought it was an amazing idea. So we've just made like a book, which I just got delivered last week. So all those submissions that are on Base and on Zora are actually now also like postcards in a book. So I've just started selling those as well. So I'm kind of experimenting with this world building idea around music. And part of that is the digital, the way of building a project, which the blockchain was really important for Scenes, because it was partially conceptually about like what happens if the artist owns everything and everything happens off social media platforms. So, it was crowdfunded using like a token. So the whole project was funded by the people that took part. So then when they took part and the album came out, they felt connected to it. And all of the artwork was stored on chain as well. So all the financial transactions and all the kind of like storage and stuff was happening on chain in the background, which was for me kind of conceptually important because it was also like, stepping away from social media, building your fan base in your own, your own artist owned place. It was a bit ahead of its time. It was hard to do. But now that's becoming like more of a common train of thought. And I know before we started talking, Sydney was talking about, having your own, in this case, like AI infrastructure or models to work with. And I think like Scenes is a precursor to that, right? Which is like your own world that includes your fan base as well, like engaging. So yeah, it's also an album, right? Like it's also on Spotify and out everywhere to listen to.
If people want to hear it on Spotify, they will search for Sound of Fractures on Spotify, and then it'll be your latest album.
Yeah, Scenes is the latest album, exactly.
Are you
My
still
debut
releasing
album.
campaigns around that? Are you still actively doing campaigns like rolling out content, expanding the website? I know you already built the website, so you had campaigns. Are all of your campaigns for this project kind of on the closing, or are you still actively running
The
more campaigns?
project's ongoing, right? Because the project is now taking it out. It's almost like, I asked people a bunch of questions and they responded with these memories, and now I'm taking their memories out in the world. So, the next step is I'm trying to get funding for an exhibition in the summer, which will be like my version of a debut show. So there'll be like live music in the night, in the daytime. There's a bunch of visuals I've created from these memories. All these things that are happening will be like on the screens. I've got a friend of mine who's like a really interesting NFT artist helping me build some stuff. So like people, when they come to the exhibition, they can like answer the prompt still and they'll appear on the screens live to make it immersive. And there's the book, right? So it's kind of like an ongoing conversation. In the background, I'm really interested in extending the life of music. The project itself was partly about that, right? Like each of these scenes, as we called them, these submission periods were happening like one a month or one every 2 months. So the idea was that it was like I called it like episodal, right? Like a TV series. So like the life of the album like continued to live on as kind of people interacted with it and created new art from it. So it wasn't just like here's the song, next song, here's the song, next song. It was kind of like adding to this like world.
So,
And yeah, we're still building that world. We're taking it out to do live shows and exhibitions and physical products in the book.
so the goal is funding for a physical exhibition in the summer. Goal is to have a physical exhibition, and right
Yeah,
now your current campaign is finding funding in order to support that exhibition in the summertime.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Looking for patrons, looking for investors, looking for sponsors. Like there's a lot of we're moving to like an age of people wanting like things that have like emotional depth, but also are doing that away from like the main social media platforms. So I think there's like some strong narratives for brands in there as well. And the whole project is, to be independent of like the major label music industry has to be supported by some kind of financing, right? And actually one of the things that I'm learning is if we want to experiment with these new models and be the first people to do it, you have to find alternative funding.
Hmm.
They're not ready to support those kind of like experiments. They want to pick them up when they see them as finished. But someone's got to do the testing, someone's got to work it out, and someone's got to be the person that makes it work, right? Because no one wants to do it until it works.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's why I'm so grateful that you saw value in Recoup early on. Is it's hard to get people will fight you until it is at the mid curve, and so you're constantly facing that uphill battle of a friction until then. Did you originally try Recoup for this campaign of finding funding for your physical exhibition in the
Okay.
summer, or was there a different reason that
No,
you?
do you know what? That is exactly it. Like what actually happened is that I started this year being like, I've got this really different career model, right? As an artist, which is that I'm doing panels, I'm doing like commissions, I'm doing like, like I'm looking for funding from just like art patrons. And I started to get really interested in like other creative industry models. So I started to read a lot about like design studios and creative studios, think architecture studios, basically like how do other creative worlds run their businesses. And I think music has like a problem a lot of the time, which is that we just have a very strict model that's been the same for a very long time. And I started to meet some people doing some really interesting stuff, which is that they were running their creative output as a business in a different way to how musicians do. So I wanted to start this year with like, yeah, how do I make these things happen? They don't fit in a box. I was being approached by music industry managers, and I'm experienced, right? Like, so when someone sits down with me, like, what you need to do is just like DJ every night, film it on your phone, post it on TikTok. And I've got two young kids as well, right? So I don't, like, I don't want to go out and DJ for £30 a night or $100 at 3 in the morning, seven. It's just like that's not the career that I'm looking for, right? Like, I'm
But
looking
that's
to
what
do.
Fred again does.
Well, yeah, yeah, no, exactly. He doesn't, right? That's the thing. But everyone else supposedly has to. I mean, I want to do what Fortet does and stuff, where do an immersive exhibition run for 4 days and take it to galleries around the world, or you're looking to do something different. And I think that that's important, right? Because if you want to do something different, this is the key. You've got to like build your own tool set, and that's kind of what I sat down with. It's like, okay, I don't know how to write an email to. This is basically one of the things I sat down with, right? Which is like, if brand partnerships and sponsorships are going to be a big part of this business model, I don't know how to do that, right? And actually, the music industry managers I was having meetings with, good electronic music managers, like with artists on Ninja Tune and places like that, they were like, "What do you need?" And I was like, "Really, what I need is someone to find a sponsor for this exhibition. Or what I need is like someone to give me some money to pay a developer to build this thing." And they were like, "Oh, I can't really do that, but like, you know, I could take you to meet an agent." And I was like, "Yeah, well, an agent will come to me when I've got enough followers on social media, right?" Like that. There is still a lot of things that a music industry manager could do for me at the right time, but because those early steps for me are not just doing everything, right? Early steps for an 18-year-old is to do everything, work with everyone, go out every night. That's not crazy advice, but I'm not 18, right? Like, and
You know, you said something interesting that I've been talking to my wife about a lot. So she comes from the fine art world. She was like an art curator for billionaires, is like what
right.
she did. And like, so like she would like, she knew what made fine art and contemporary art valuable. And a lot of it was stories and the connection with artists and the exclusivity of the collectors and all of that. You look at like all of these Damien Hirsts and everything who like are the contemporary, like, you know, the top tier of artistry of in that world. But then you look at music, and I think like because of the devaluation and oversaturation of platforms, like it's people only think of it as one way. But I think it's like there's a wide open lane for a musician to reframe themselves as a contemporary artists in an audio visual medium,
That's
as opposed to
yeah.
I'm a musician, right? And now all of a sudden your fans, then you're positioning yourself as fans and collectors, right? Like there's fans of Damien Hirst, but then there's the collectors of Damien Hirst who can actually afford to pay for the art and own it. And so I think there's like a really huge opportunity, and kind of what you're doing, it sounds like, is like your world is more about visual medium storytelling and when you say artist, like the true actual like contemporary artistry, like your shit should be in a museum, not on Spotify.
I've got a meeting next week with someone I met completely randomly, a friend, a kid's mum, or who works for a famous artist, and my like straight. I've always I'm good at asking questions, right? So this kind of leads into what I was going to say about what's hard about using AI tools, right? Is that I'm good at asking questions, right? And you presume that everybody knows the right questions to ask, right? But when I met this person, I was like, "What's your job role called?" And she was like, "I'm the MD of his company." And I was like, "Okay, what's his company called?" "Well, his company is just his name." And I was like, "See, like musicians don't think like that, right?" So I was like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "Well, like I'm reaching out every day to like high net worth individuals. I'm like sorting out commissions. I'm speaking to sponsors every day. I'm like building relationships. I'm like showcasing his work to them. I'm like bringing them in to look at it. I'm like," and that got me down this road of like, maybe that's what I need, right? Like maybe I need someone out there to go and do the work, which leads into the thing of like, okay, well, you can't just find someone ready, perfect to do that work for you, right? But you might be able to find someone who's like really good at getting shit done, right? Like getting work done, getting tasks done. And neither of us have that deep knowledge of that industry. But what you can use, like LLMs for especially, is like harvesting information, right? So I started to like, one of the things that I think is really important for using them, I'm just writing a blog post about this morning, is like knowing how to feed the right information, right? And I think like one of the things that I learned while trying to do these last couple of weeks is I had to build like a massive database, right? And the first step in that actually came from Recoup, right? Because I was like, okay, what's my audience, right? I don't have a very big audience, right? So like, how do brands and people think about audiences? How do they talk about audiences? I see Sweetman tweet this thing. I'm very much like an experimenter. Which went straight on, logged in straight away, and just started like exploring. Like what information can this get for me that is like hard for me to action? First of all, multiple places, right? Like we're all platform agnostic. We have to be in each platform. It's very hard to like look at that information the same way. And the idea of like actionable data thing is like such a buzzword at the moment, but what you find with anything that is built, especially on AI, is you always get the answers first that you already know, right? Which is that, yeah, sure, you can tell me that all my fans like Fred again, and it will say, go and make content like Fred again, right? Or it will be like, all your followers are like this age group, and the other main interest is cars. Go and write a song about cars. You're like, no shit. I'm like, that's not really useful. That's not really useful information. It appears useful on the surface, and a lot of the platforms like try and sell that as really actionable information. But I think like LLMs are broadening that, which is like, we can now take this kind of like network of information. So I actually took my Recoup data and I just built like a Word document of all my Word. And the next step would
Would
be,
you mind showing us? Would it be
Yeah.
possible for you to show how you took the info?
Okay, yeah, cool. Okay, so let me open it up. So I built like a bunch of Word documents, but I think like one of the things that's really important to think about, like when you're, for me, which I would argue that is something to think about for Recoup as well, is that like, you're not just you can't just use your data, right? You can't just map out your data as an artist because you don't have that much data, right? So you kind of have to like partner that with, like, I guess like filling gaps, right? You've got to fill the gaps, right? And part of that is like, okay, you've got to go out and do some research and think about like, what kind of creator do I want to be? And that takes some time. But I'd kind of already had in my head of like, okay, there's this guy out here doing this. I kind of like that element of what they do. And there's this person out here doing this with content, and I really like that element of what they do. And in a dream world, you know, look at someone like Brian Eno doing all this incredible stuff, whatever he wants, because he's got a 50-year legacy. But let's just, you know, for example, like, what's his audience, right? So I basically started entering into Recoup other people's platforms, right? So like, what's that person's audience? What do they look like? What do they do? So I kind of built like first of all, I built like an audience's information, which was basically like what I got from Recoup based on my stuff. You know, I concentrated on a few of them that felt the biggest and the most relevant to me. So there was one that was like heartfelt music enthusiasts. There was, you know, like I asked it to get some next steps, supportive fans of originality. I said that felt quite right to me. And then I looked at some example audiences. Okay, so like, what's Elijah's audience look like? What's that made up of? And then I kind of got this like, I picked out a few of his that felt good. And I was like, okay, so now I've got like this document that has like a broad sweep of a bunch of audiences that I think are like really like could be the core like component of what I'm looking for, and fed that into Claude with my artist bio, and just wrote like a very, this is one of the things that I love those models for, is that I'm dyslexic and I can just splurge into them, right? So I can just be like, okay, so I'm an artist, I've got this idea of who I think I should be, I'm trying to communicate that to people. And it's really complicated. I want to take this broad spectrum of stuff that I'm giving you, and I want you to help me communicate that clearly, maybe is like a good way of saying it, right? Like, I need to communicate this to people who might give me money, right? So the next step is kind of is with a bit of work, you know, like I realized it needed context, right? So I went and got some blog posts about like people like Matt Dryhurst and Holly Herndon and some YouTubers and influencers, how they talk about themselves, but also like press, and kind of like fed it in alongside this audience's information, and got it to write me this kind of like social media approach and content strategy. Not massively like world groundbreaking. But when I read it, I was like, okay, this is starting to feel like me, right? This, you know, like I added it. It did it first time, and I was like, actually, like my family's a big part of how I talk about my personal life, so I want to put that in there as well. And I kind of got to this point where I was like, this feels kind of useful to me, right? Like that describes in good work, like what's going on here, the content pillars that I see, some of the aesthetic things that that happen in those other people's platforms that I think tie them together. And then you're starting to get to something you're starting to get somewhere then, right? Because
Do you still have the prompt that how you got it into Claude? I'm curious to see what your prompt for Claude was and how you felt about the output of
I was
that.
writing, I'm about to publish a blog post about it, so I kind of have it on my desktop.
So I'm curious to know what you were able to, it sounds like you went from Recoup into Google Doc, into Claude, and now that's where you're currently at and you're about to export something else, right?
Well, it's even, I took it actually even further than that, right? Because ChatGPT does some stuff like quicker and like references documents in ways which is different to Claude. So I was going backwards and forwards, right? You know, like I initially fed things into GPT, but GPT is like the output can be really trashy and obvious, but it's really quick and really easy to work with, and just like, you know, like it's like, you know, they've splurged all their money and it's going to cost us loads soon, but it's like quick, easy. It feels like using everything that exists already. The output from Claude is better. But yeah, so I bounce around to see what works, but essentially I made like a folder of documents. So I can actually just show you. I go to my drive. I can show you, actually, I'll just show you. You know what? I've got a document right here with all of it in, because I was organizing it this morning. So, boom, 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 boom. Draft for my blog post, preview of my blog post for my Substack, which is where I do all my writing. I mean, doing it like this is a much better way to do it, right? Like I could just take you into the actual like Claude chat and show you, but you know, like I started off by trying to map out everything that made up my career, because I was like, I keep trying to explain this to people and it's really hard. So I started just like visualizing everything and how it fits together. You know, I teach at university, I write up some of my stuff. So the first step was a very simple question, right? Which was based on what I was talking about, which was the press releases. So I actually started by saying, I want to build a new framework for my business and I'm going to feed you some information. So it comes back at me, and I know quite how to feed things quite well. So I feed in like some of my like project EPKs, press releases, you know, the stuff that's like a thing for each project that describes what it is. And then I set it up, right? Which is that I'm an electronic music artist, but I work in a multidisciplinary way. I'm trying these different things, and that involves taking music releases, world building, and I'm looking at building new revenue models to draw from the identity and concepts of my projects. Fed it this prompt, and it spits out an answer, right? And ChatGPT is really good at those quick answers. So it spits out a thing which is, here's your, you know, like define your mission, key areas of focus, organizational structure, strategic goals. You know, they were kind of useful. And I had put in the prompt that I see one area that I'm going to need help in, because it's always best to like guide it slightly, is looking at admin support and coordination, right? Like I do need someone to do work, right? There's work that needs doing, and I want to go and make music. So I kind of refined that again and asked for specific tasks. I was like, okay, let's make a list of specific tasks for all these things. The prompt is there, right? But again, I always feed it, right? Some of these tasks might look something like this, right? Here's a bunch of tasks that I know that I need help with. Exploring partnerships, admin. I kind of loosely think that those things are important. So I feed that in and it gives me a response. I'll post this tomorrow, so if you can link people to it if they actually want to read it. So I think like this is the point where I think like using these models works, becomes like, this is like the next level, right? I think that's like level 1, and I think like level 2 for me is like this next step is just like stopping and being like, okay, that's kind of useful, right? But I'm quite experienced, like I kind of know what I'm doing. I need like actual stuff that's going to make things happen, right? What's actually going to make stuff happen, right? Just pause for a second. And I stopped and thought, you know, like I need to go deeper, right? So these were the documents I made, right? So I went back and went deeper on the context. So I made a document of all my income streams. I wrote them out myself, and then I actually like gave it my accounts as well. Right. So, but I made another chat GPT for that. Right. So I just started a fresh chat GPT conversation, gave it my revenue streams, gave it my accounts, was like, I'm a musician. Here's my revenue stream. Give me a summary. Boom, one document. Social media summary, which was Recoup. Right. So Recoup built me a social media summary along with some extra stuff. My project write-ups, press kits, music stuff. I went and got like a bunch of interviews I'd done. I went and got some examples of like, if I'm talking about creative studios, what does that mean, right? Like, I went out and got some like art. There's you know, the internet's full of stuff, right? I went and found some articles on like A24. You know, like what are cool creative companies doing stuff in interesting ways? Fed them in, right? Like, here's some information on different revenue models. What can a musician learn? YouTubers, right? Like YouTubers, Twitchers. My tick list was like an article about some YouTubers, an article about Twitchers, an article about someone like building a fashion brand, like on TikTok. Like I can't think of some names, but there's some cool stuff happening on TikTok at the moment, and a few things like that, right? And I fed in some articles about like Holly Herndon and Matt Dryhurst and like Brian Eno. I fed in all my projects, and I built like. I was like, oh shit, I'm gonna have to go deeper. I'm gonna have to really like build this world because ChatGPT will just go off on a tangent.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of got to that point, and at that point I went into Claude, right? So like at that point I built these like documents, and I went back into Claude, and this is where it started to really kind of click a bit better, right? As I went back to Claude, I basically used basic GPT to make me push myself as to like how can I get better information, and then built this much bigger thing. And then I tried a new prompt, which was like building a framework for what my business could look like, and I kind of reworded it, right, similar prompt, and tried again but with better information. And I said some challenges, like one of the challenges I faced is converting my approach of a traditional musician to treating Sound of Fractures, me in brackets, as a startup or creative studio.
Yep.
So what this will be about working out is what needs to be done, what work needs to be done, and how to grow and expand it. And that's kind of where I got to. And the response I got from there was a lot better. I mean, this is just a summary, but I think like this is like the important thing that I think it can do. I still don't think it's perfect, but I don't know how to speak the language of investors. When I got into Web3, I still don't, right? When I got into Web3, I was like, how has this guy got so much money? This idea doesn't even work, right? Like they haven't even read about like how PROs work. They can't do this. Right? These meetings where they're like, yeah, you know, Spotify is going to be on chain next year. So, you know, like, and you're like, dude, are you mad? You're not even legally allowed to do this, right? Like, this isn't legal. This isn't going to work. Like, you can't decide that you're just not going to register songs with PRS in the UK, right? Like, that's not how it works. So what I found was that, like, I was like, how do I speak this language that I don't understand? And I still don't understand, right? But there are people going out there having conversations, getting money. That's the basics. But that's the same in any industry, right? Like, how does somebody go from being a music person to being a consultant? Well, I ask people that, and they're like, well, you have to know when to ask for money, right? Or you have to know how to ask for money, or like, right. You know, that world. But I think like this is the gaps that AI can fill for some of us, right? Like, how can we, you know, I went back to Recoup, and I think like one of the things that we'll talk about when we look at it is that I think there's like different questions it can help us answer to some of the things that that presume we need. And you know, like simple actionable things like what to put in an email is more productive, right? Like
you said,
I think like,
an email.
What to put in an email, right? Like what do I put in an email to email, you know, Native Instruments or a fashion brand or Zora or whoever, and be like, and communicate the value that I could bring to their brand and why they should invest in me. Because that's where we're going, right? Like TikTok and people have been doing that for a long time, right? Brandon, I spoke to a friend of a friend, I should say, because I get to interview people from a uni who manages like a big rapper in the UK. And I was like, oh, because everyone hates all this stuff. He was like, I love it. He was like, we never earned as much money as this. All the like 90% of his income is just brand endorsements for TikTok.
Right.
But we don't know how to have those conversations. And actually, to be fair, like those people don't either. It's very reactionary, right? Like they've got an artist that blows up, the brand comes to them. But now we're in phase 2, which is like, how does someone like me start earning money like that?
Right.
Rather than coming out of like the mainstream music industry and then getting those opportunities and being reactionary to those things, right? So like, I'm trying to work out like how I be that person from day one, which I'm not a TikToker. It's probably easier to be an influencer, right? But like my industry, my career pathway is a bit more hybrid, but I'm still trying to work out that stuff, right? Like, how do I get the right support slots? How do I, get paid the right amount? How do I get free gear? How do I get a free copy of Ableton? They're not wild questions, and micro influencing is becoming important again. Like, just because you've only got 5,000 followers doesn't mean you can't get a discount from Ableton. Like I get sent a lot of stuff, and I think the first challenge for me as always is this isn't built for independent artists. And I'm not saying that's where the money is, but in past it's never been where the money is. But now we're starting to see even like TikTok and Spotify shift towards creator economies, right? We're moving more that way, right? Like those micro pennies are becoming more important, of like capturing those small amounts of value from lots of creators, and the back end money isn't as great, right? So that the creators are spending money. So I guess, yeah, like my problem often is that they're positioned at management companies or labels, a lot of the tools out there. And I don't think they're very useful for people like me, for independent, sustainable career building, and also finding something different, right? I think like at first it seemed really cool that you could type in like, what content should I make tomorrow? And it would say, here's 10 content ideas, right? And then you do it for 2 months and you're like, it's doing the same thing every week, right?
It's
Like,
kind of missing that real time. Here's what's trending on TikTok, or here's what's trending on Instagram today, and like taking that real time new information into account in the recommendation, instead of, okay, we built the model 6 months ago. This worked great 6 months ago. It'll probably work great in 6 months, when in reality, if these models are starting to get to the point where they need to change on a daily basis or even on a minute basis of like, this is what's new. If Jamie asks this question at 9 a.m., he's going to get this answer. But if he asks this question at 5 p.m., the data set is different that we're pulling from. And so your answer is going to be different.
Or like what Sydney said earlier is, how did you make this for me, not for everyone, right? Like, and I think like the question and answer thing is important. Context is going to become more and more important, right? And I think for me, it's really easy to work out what I should feed these things, right? I've been practicing, and it's still hard for me. But one of the things I think would be very useful for somebody to do, like whether it's Recoup or somebody to do, is like a context questionnaire.
Yes.
Right? What are the artists you aspire to be like? Why? Right? Like what is your like, what are the things you're passionate about? The major labels used to do it in their marketing department. They sign an artist, right, to work out what their content should be. But we can do that ourselves, right? When you start speaking to those people, you're like, oh, this isn't rocket science. So why not just do that for myself? It's kind of hard to do. It's kind of hard to do with yourself, right? But I think if you've got this weird thing to bounce off of, it makes it a lot easier. If it comes back,
your current process is very manual. I really like your article, because I think your article is an incredible snapshot of the current best practice for musicians. You run a lot of it, and you jump from Claude, you jump from Recoup. If you have this awesome new tool, you jump to OpenAI, and you give yourself a plan, and you do a lot of managing across that. And it's more like small LLMs, but no agentic behavior of like combining that for you into that list that you had before of like, these are the real outputs. Yeah. And the latest set of frameworks, latest set being what's been released in the last 7 days, or maybe the more recently than the last 7 days, are like Eliza OS, Agent Kit, Cerebro, Virtuals, that you plug in a whole bunch of your stuff. It tries to read it and generate your personality, and then act on your behalf, kind of taking some of those actions, like sending emails, doing outreach, trying to find collabs, creating some of that content and plugging in the plugins. Have you, in your tool belt, have you started looking at those like full agentic stacks?
I'm right on the cusp. I think like what puts me off is that like for me personally, a big part of like my identity, like outward identity, is about like being genuine and like emotional and kind of like real life stuff. And that's a big part, like emotional honesty. And that's like hard to toe that line with. I've been watching TK do some stuff, and I kind of feel like I think we're at the point now where we can let go a little bit. Like I could have something writing tweets for me. You know, it's very hard to even get any of my followers to see any of my content, right? It's broadly new followers that get shown everything first, right? Like, so I don't think there's like, I don't need to be as precious anymore. I'm not very natural at being braggadocious and being like, you know, just spitting out random bits of information like that, like some artists do well. So like in my head, next step would be like, yeah, I'll try it with Twitter. Let's just get something set up so it tweets like once a day or twice a day on my behalf. But what I find is that the voice is just like wild, right?
Yeah.
Like it just like, I think like the trick for me with prompting, my personal route to prompting well, which is not necessarily like the way to do it, I'm not that experienced, is just that like I have to keep it on a very tight leash. Right. And as soon as it goes
like,
off,
here's an example is like,
yeah.
You see the auto post. I was like, awesome, we're practicing in public. It's obviously not TK. Like I was able to see that and make it. And then TK replies and says he thought he turned it off. I try to reach out and be like, do you want to get on a live stream like this? And then his bot replies, and you get a little bot reply of like, not him. And I'm like, well, now I don't even know if I can trust TK in the communication because I'm trying to give him outreach, but I'm getting a bot reply and I'm able to see that it's a bot reply. So I don't know if TK is aware that I even sent this message to him.
I know what I would want my bot to do to start with, right? And I haven't explored those models enough to see if it can do that, right? But I simply would just like my bot to take like quote, I do a lot of writing. I've had to learn, never did writing before, but I've started writing up these experiments to just be like, take bits of my writing and tweet it.
Yeah, right? don't even make up shit. Just actually see things I've said.
Man.
That's
and
a good idea.
Don't answer anyone. Don't fucking answer anyone. I'm not like, I'm not Taylor Swift. I haven't got a million people responding to comments to me every day, right? Like, I don't need someone to do that. This is the point that people are missing, right? Like, I think the point is that right now, superfan narratives are about making a connection with the person, right? And independent artists are uniquely positioned to do that because we can actually answer, right? Like, we don't need a bot to do that. I don't need a bot to say some mad, fantastical, like wild shit. I just want that fan to know that I've seen them, not the opposite, right? But I see the game in that. I can see how that can become a fun game, right? Like for fans as well, right? Like, here's this thing we can interact with. But for me personally, all I need is like regularity, content creation, and putting my voice out in the world without me physically always having to do it. And that's really interesting to me. But I'm open to the game a bit more now, right? Like I think we can relax a bit.
I'm trying to just think through what do you need for autopilot? Because the kind of where I thought through our roadmap is for the past 6 months, we've been building what Eliza OS now formalizes as providers, which are, we can get your TikTok, we can scrape all your TikTok, all your followers, all your comments, all your videos. We can scrape your Instagram, all your reels, all the comments, all the followers, all your videos. We can do that for Twitter. We can do that for Spotify. That's not included in Eliza. That's not included in other AI frameworks. If you go to ChatGPT, they don't have that. We have those providers. Now I'm starting to try to think through, okay, what are the actions that musicians actually need that are not currently represented in the other toolkits? You're mentioning email sending, you're mentioning brand outreach. Like I'm hearing
joining the dots, right? Joining the dots. The setup is important, right? If as you're saying it, I'm like, okay, what I would do is I would be like, let's take those audience segments, ask Claude to analyze all my writing that I've done or all my previous content, writing content, maybe for me slightly different, right? And make connections, like which parts of this information would be relevant to those audiences, right? Take like that sentence about like what we, a sentence from today and tweet it out because it would resonate with like a music enthusiast audience, right? That, like it's, I think it can just be drawn for any artist. It's about the customization, right? You could take a quote from me today that says, me personally, all my content's about being emotional and being whatever I said, that's a tweet, right? But I would never tweet that. But that would be that's an amazing, I think, connections and how that's very hard for me to teach any of these models to do properly. I have to start again every time, right? Like, okay, whole new custom GPT or new project. Here's all the stuff I just made. Let's start from scratch, right? Here's I'm going to give you an audience document and I want you to pick out 50, take my writing and write me 50 quotes in my voice that would resonate with that audience, right? And I think like what we talked about earlier is that we could make that happen, right? Like you could do that. And what Recoup could do is say to you, well, I don't have that information yet, but here's 5 questions I'm going to ask you, right? Type in the answers. Maybe it's like, what makes you excited about making music, right? What's 5 questions? It's a good one. What's 5, like that it could give you 5 questions where the answers would resonate with your top audiences, right? Like, how do you help the person make the content, right? Like, how do you like assist them? How do you actually assist them in getting them out of them? Because that's really what works, right? Copying other people's content isn't really what does it. It can do it short term, but if you look at anyone that people are really excited about, they've got their own thing. So it's like, I guess it's like, how do you assist artists in extracting the right information from them to add to this system that you've built, right? Like, how do you aid them in the customization? Because they can't really do it. I like, Sweetman knows I did this project called Network Archives, where we got all this writing from all these amazing projects in Web3 music that were really experimental world building in projects, and I released it into the world. And what I found was that this document was so good, but what I took for granted is that people would be able to understand how to get the information out of it. And I've had to start using AI to write a guide, right? Because in this document is basically like case studies of some of the coolest stuff that I've ever seen musicians do. But that doesn't mean to say like some 21-year-old musician wants to sit down and read for 5 hours and work out what to do with that, right? And I think like they're the kind of like things that we're like come naturally to some creatives, which is like how this world building journey that some of us are on, it takes like assistance, right? It takes like a partner. And I think that's what these tools are really, really grateful for me, right? It's like, I don't have a manager. But a lot of the time, what most managers do is sit you down and be like, okay, what do you want to do? And then the artist is like, I want to try this, I want to try that. And the manager will say, well, go away, make a list of these things, right? Find some other artists. Back in the day, it used to be go and make a playlist, right? Go and make a playlist of the artists you see yourself sitting alongside. And the manager would send that to a label and be like, yeah, we want some beats for this kid. Here's his demo. This is the world we want him to sit in or her to sit in, right? And that's kind of like what I think we need to get a little bit better at, right? Is that it sounds silly, but that there's a human element to a lot of the decisions that I think we don't think about replicating, which is the conversation, right? Like really a music designed AI, for me, should have that one piece of difference, right? Is that what should make Recoup different, and beyond having all those things you just said, is that it would come back and know how to get more context that's relevant.
You just nailed it, man. I think the way you just framed it, because
at the end of the day, like a good music manager follows the checklist of things that needs to happen for a release and kind of copy and pastes that checklist across all other artists. A great music manager takes all of the context that they've had over their career and the artist that they're working with's context and creates a very bespoke strategy for that specific artists and then executes on that strategy. And I think that a lot of these LLMs could be used very simply to be a good music manager. Hey, make me a content idea. All right, cool. X, Y, Z. But the key of being great is you need to have all of the context. Who is this artist? And where are their strengths, their weaknesses? Like, where can they be different in the market? How do we, capture opportunity in those differences? And then executing on those different ideas that are avant-garde ideas at the end of the day, or traditional ideas. And that's such an interesting insight because it's so true. Like when you think about artists, you know, everybody forgets, or I don't know everybody, but that artists are really at the core small businesses, each of them. So, you know, when you're looking at like these LLMs, like thinking through the same problems that enterprise customers and small businesses are going to have, which is like, what are the context? Where's our data sources coming from? All of that stuff applies to artists and creators as well.
Yeah.
And which is so much different than like what ChatGPT is trying to do, which is just the general public who don't necessarily need to give all of that context to it.
We've got and individuality has become such a vital thing, right? Being individual has become such a big currency, right? Like I met a guy recently who just like, he's just this like crazy interesting dude, and he makes a very good living from endorsements from synth and plugin companies, right? And he used to be a producer, but now he just wakes up every day, he freestyles, he makes music, he shows how to make something with a synth. And that wasn't a lane that no one would have been like, I desperately want to. No music manager would be like, I can't wait to manage you. But now they're probably like, oh, this guy's got actual income, right? Which for like an emerging artist is very, very rare, right? Like he may well be earning anywhere between 100K and 300K a year, right? Like I'm ballparking it, guessing, but that's an incredibly healthy living. Right?
No, I love, and the idea of like, how do you become the top tier person in your vertical is becoming so niche, but like if you become the A-list in your vertical, like I think, right, like traditionally the A-list, all musicians aspire to be Taylor Swift, right? Yeah. Because they want to go on the tour and they want to do like, but everybody's going through that door, when in the reality is if you become the top tier plugin guy, like you can take that so far and people don't realize how, because at the end of the day, like then you can start creating your own plugins and you start changing the sound of music, and it like there's a whole lane for that. But it's how do you have a manager or a team around you to understand like, yeah, let's go down this route because it's working and there's so much opportunity here.
How do you build the information you need to feed it? Sorry, Stephen.
We've got 5 minutes left. Can we talk through what are the bugs you're seeing? And if you haven't seen the latest features, I'd love to show them to you.
I would love to see the new features. Like one of my main things I think speaks a lot to about like what we were talking about today, right? Which is that I think like the knowledge base thing is important, right? Which is what this artist screen feels like it should be to me, right? Like as you can see, I've kind of tried different things and I didn't know how to wind it back. But what I feel like the artist thing should be for me is kind of like the knowledge base, right? I don't fully understand how it works. I know like the fan base wrapped is like one of the new things, right? And one of the basic bugs I've had is I can't get the Spotify analyzer to work. I think like finding your Spotify username, even for someone as experienced by me, is like really frustrating, right? Like it should be in like, it should just be in your artist profile, right? Copy linked artist. It should be a series of numbers in that thing, but I find with a lot of platforms that it doesn't work. A lot of things that aim to pull data, it's like it's never that easy. So I haven't got Spotify to work yet myself.
How are you trying Spotify right now? Are you using the Wrapped and then you're plugging? Can you show me how you're using Spotify or how you're trying?
I've got Spotify on my desktop.
In Recoup, how are you trying to scrape your Spotify?
So I'm just going to this main agent screen, and I'm just clicking on Spotify Analyzer. Which actually seems like maybe it's done it now. I did work it out today without knowing it, which is interesting, right? Because that doesn't look like my Spotify analysis. I think that's got mixed up. I think that's actually my Twitter. I think that's actually my Twitter. It's gone with there.
So you clicked on agents and then you just clicked on Spotify and it took you right to this report?
Yeah. Well, no, I think I tried it earlier today. I clicked on it. And I tried to enter my Spotify, it didn't work.
Yeah.
It kept saying there's no data. So I went back to agents. I went to X Analyzer. And there you go. And I did X. But what seems to have happened now is that is showing in my Spotify agent.
Okay. When you, I'm trying to think through, do you like when you click on an agent, you then type in a name and like have that ability to search? Or do you want it such that you go to your artists, you go to your knowledge bases, you select an artist, and then you go over to agents and you select an agent that runs based off of the artist you have active in the top right corner.
I think there's still a part of me that doesn't fully understand why it's separated that way, right? I think like I guess it makes sense in terms of like what they're trying to do with the information. Part of me just thinks that like maybe you can explain to me why it works that way, but I think like in my brain, this is just me, my artist brain is like, okay, so now I've got that information, right? If I go to one of these things and I go to Analyzer, we saw it before, right? We go to me as an artist, I get my information, I've got my Twitter audience. I don't need to just have a conversation with that agent, the Twitter agent anymore, right? Like in my mind, I'm like, why isn't that information, what I showed you, what I did, why haven't I just got like a document of all that information for each of those platforms, and it just goes to like a central agent?
So
right, like I don't need a separate agent for all of those. I know there's probably some like content creators out there that would argue you should be customizing content for each channel, but I do think like it makes sense to me to have like a central artist database.
in that case, have you seen the autopilot feature yet? It's not publicly available, so unless you can you go to your domain for, I think it's chat.recoupable.com/autopilot.
Okay, here.
No, let me check.
Hey, I spelled auto wrong. Hang on.
Okay.
I'm dyslexic, so that happens a lot.
There we go.
Okay, cool.
So this is what we're starting to think through now is like when you run an agent, you have an artist selected in the top right. This should be your homepage for seeing all of the knowledge bases in terms of like, cool, you can see that you've identified your Twitter. We don't see that you've identified anything else. And so we should automatically start scraping those other platforms. And if we can't identify your username, we should be asking you for that on the right. And then in the bottom right, you'll see the ability to create a new chat around this artist, the ability to run a new agent around this artist, or the ability to create a new artist. Is this kind of closer to your vision, or is this still not matching
my
the
vision?
experience?
Yeah, that's close to my vision. I think like there's still like language complexities that even someone like me struggles with, right? Like what is the reasoning for having an agent? What does that mean?
Why even have agent there?
What does that mean? Like why? Like I think like to an artist, it's just like, isn't this whole thing my agent? Like why do I need a new agent? Who's the new agent? Right? Like it's like, or like you know, in a way it's like if you had a marketing agent or like a content agent or like a, you know, an outreach agent, that would make some sense, right? But I think that your artist brain is kind of, we don't fully understand how like agents are conceptualized in like normal world, right? Like you're using it from a perspective of understanding how they're built and how they act. And I think that even someone like me is still trying to like, it's like a new language, right? Like, what does that mean? Like, why, what do I don't even know why I would click on new agent. What would I do that for?
Why would I do that? Last thing, can you go to /funnels/base? I want to hear your thoughts. Right now, we're starting to, so like you've seen, so far it's not running for you 24/7. You go into it, you activate it, it gives you a report, and then it kind of stops. Funnels/base. Where we're going into now is having something that's kind of always running, and I want to get, maybe it's singular funnel and not funnels. I don't know. I think it's plural because I have always tried going to singular.
Chat. I might be just spelling something wrong because I am wildly dyslexic. Okay, here we go. FUNNELS.
Yeah, this is it. So this is a button you probably won't need to click in the future, but I built this prototype over the weekend. Can you click the start button? And so now an agent's running, and it'll have a 33-second life, and then it'll die, and then it'll tell you the wallet that it created. And each time you click it, it's creating a brand new agent. I think moving forward, we don't, I don't necessarily know where I'm going with this, but I wanted you to see it as where we're starting to think through is autopilot, and the agent that you're trying here is an example of what we're going to start to build. We're going to integrate it more deeply, and so I think I'll probably want your thoughts more once I've actually integrated into the product, because right now it's the standalone prototype, and it might not make too much sense. But this is our first take at trying to integrate the frameworks like Cerebro, Eliza, the fully running, always-on autonomous agents, integrating that in so that you have an agent that's probably not posting for you on Twitter or socials, but is more generating emails, scraping your platform, knowing when a new comment is put on your post, and auto-updating your campaign in real time. Do you have any initial takes on a feature like that, or that new phrasing of what we're building?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think for someone like me, I think I'm quite into like documenting, right? So like having something that is like documenting my output on chain is interesting to me. Having something that interacts for me in different places is interesting to me. I think like aggregating like what's happening on different social media platforms is always going to be problematic for whoever who's trying to do that, right? Like having a central place to show where you're being messaged, you know, like who's commenting on your stuff is ideal. But from historically, what I understand it is those things often get shut down, right? Like, so I think like what those actual steps are is quite hard to just to like let something loose with, right? Like if we're talking about like emails, but like emails to who, right? Like how far are we, you know, how far are we going here? But I think like the assistant part that ChatGPT, these models should be doing well is like, okay, here's some brands that we think would align with your main audience, right? Like here's a draft email, and it should ask you to write an opening sentence that's personal, right? It should ask you to personalize it, and then maybe it spells checks your writing like a ChatGPT does, and then, you know, it's not going to be able to give you an email, right? But it might suggest some place. I think that there's a partnership element that's often missed, right? Like everyone's too much in a rush to do everything. But what it should do is like, here's a draft email for how you would approach a brand. Here's some suggestion of some brands. See if you can find some email addresses for these brands, and I will help you draft an email in your voice, right? Which is basically like write a note. Because sooner or later, people are going to get sick of GPT output, right? Like sooner or later, the thing that's going to really catch people's attention is something that's really real and honest, right? In terms of language. So I think like there's some customization things. It basically, it's like we haven't got the assistant thing right yet, which is like it's working with you, not doing, like, I think we're too carried away with it doing everything for you. Like it's almost like we just got a bit too carried away with that. It needs to come back to you. Do you know what I mean? So yes, here's some brands you should reach out. Here's a draft email that communicates your unique identity. Could you give me, if you have anything else to give me on the things that make you tick, share them with me. You know, like here's 4 questions to help me improve my email. What's your favorite song? Why do you create music? What things are most important to you? What are your like central values as a producer, right? Like, and it can take that information and make that email more customized, right? And I think that is the step, probably because it takes it to fucking work, I realize. But you know, like there's one little step that we could add in that could make the output of the model better than everything else, because everyone else is trying to skip. Everyone's just trying to skip everything, right? Like, how do we make because sooner or later everyone's going to have a draft of an email, right? So like, what's the difference? The difference is they're going to open it and be like, oh, this is interesting. This is different. It's not like, you know, innovative. You know, like me and TK and people, we, you know, look back at our posts from 6 months ago. They look awful, man. Like the innovative, you know, all that language that it loves to use, right? Innovating in the realm of musical science, and you know, like we all thought that was really cool for a minute, and now you look back and you're like, oh, that shit ain't that cool now. So like I kind of feel like that assistant thing is the next step. That's the thing that I think that's going to come naturally, right? The next step is it should be learning about you, right? Like people are scared of that, but it should be like, it should have a set response, which is like, I think this could be customized to be more personalized to you. Here's some questions that you could answer to help me do this.
Yeah,
right?
It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast the other day. I forget which one it was, but they were talking about how like the current state of LLMs in like, you know, GPT and cloud stuff is like it does a very good job at like mansplaining or bulldozing through conversations, right? And it isn't prompted to say, wait a second, let me iterate first before I continue to go down this path, you know? And that's like a really interesting thought. Is like,
if it assumes that it needs to get more context before it continues every time,
Yeah.
you know, or it
It should assume that, right? I think,
Yeah.
but that's what's like to be different from music, right? Because you forget the myriad of mad tasks people are using it for. People are like winning at stuff online because, you know, you can just create slot accounts, right? Like, and it doesn't matter, right? Or you can create eBay stores or, you know, Amazon stores to sell whatever the hell people are selling on TikTok, right? Same day they're selling a plant, they're selling like a tea mixer, they're selling like a coffee stirrer. For that, fine. But if we're talking about like something for like music, and one of the problems with music is like this, what's the value? Then I think the assistant thing needs some work, right? Which is that like context, and this is very much a me thing, right? Like Sweetman knows, like context matters to me. It may not matter to a 9-year-old, right? But I think that embedded in those YouTubers they love, even my like 6-year-old likes on YouTube, is like some kind of sense of identity of this person. Like they're quirky, they're funny, they're silly, whatever it is. And I think that we miss that. And I think like for it to be better, it should ask me some. It should ask, you know, like we could decide on some context questions that would really help it give better output, right? Like, which is, you know, not that complex in my mind. In my mind.
I love that idea.
As we start to wrap up, are there any final thoughts you have, Jamie, about how you're approaching going into 2025, your relationship as a musician with these AI agents and LLM tools for this year?
I think like the thing that I've learned is like we talked about today is that you assume that everyone can use them in a way that's useful and they can't. So I think one of the things that I want to do is I'm just going to start sharing my process of using them. You know, like because at first we pretended we didn't use them. And now I'm just going to kind of like more openly just share that process. You know, this is how I'm using it. See if people can help me improve it. And just be a bit more open about the fact that what I'm doing is different, and therefore like I'm going to just start openly asking for support, right? Like YouTubers do it, Twitchers do it, you know, tip my account, click subscribe. Musicians, it's seen as like trashy to do that, but if we want to innovate, if we want to like do different shit, if we want to build like sustainable careers, then we're going to need people to step up and support the work. So yeah, I would say if you're a musician, don't be afraid to start saying those things. I'm going to do it, you know, subscribe, support. And if you want to get involved in the journey, hit me up.
If people want to join in the journey and hit you up, what is your account?
SO Fractures, because Sound of Fractures is too long. But if you put Sound of Fractures in anywhere, you'll find me. But at the moment, my Substack has become like my hub for like everything that I do. So soundoffractures.substack.com. If you go to Substack, you'll find me. It's become like, okay, because it's the connection I own. I started to focus on it a bit more, and I share all my process. I share all the projects I'm working on, why I'm working on them, how I'm building them, what I'm doing, and I'm trying to build like a community and an ecosystem around that, and find people who want to invest in the long term.
Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.